Hi, my name's Paul and welcome to my question and answer video, where I'm also going to be announcing the winners of the competition for the Qantas PJs and amenity kit and a few other things as well. But first, let's have a look at the questions that some of my subscribers sent in over the last week. So the first question was from Aviation 05. What is your favourite airline? Qantas. So the next question is from Air New Zealand Lover. What is your favourite aircraft and airline? I've already mentioned the airline, so I'll just say my favourite aircraft. It depends. So to flying, it would be the Airbus A380. But otherwise, if it was just to look at, it would be the Boeing 747-400. The next question is from Joe Liston. How do you avoid getting drunk on the flights? Well, there are probably a few different things. So firstly, I'm eating a lot of food, so that always slows the absorption of alcohol. The other thing is that I'm actually flying over quite a long period of time. A large number of the flights are 12 to 15 hours, so that's quite a long time to spread the drinking. And the other thing is that the bits you'll see in the videos are the only parts where I'm able to hold a camera. Another question, Jacob Dixon, he asks, how old am I? The answer to that is old enough to get cheaper rental car prices. And how many countries have I visited? The number of that would be 19 so far, and I'll be adding Malaysia, Greece, and Turkey to that list this year. Lucas Rutter has an interesting question. What is the worst travel experience you've ever had? To be honest, I haven't really had that many bad travel experiences, but I will mention that somewhat in a question later on when they're asking about my worst flights. The next question is from Hugh Rothwell. He asks, when did I develop my interest in aviation? I've always liked mechanical things growing up, and for most of my teen years it was spent looking at cars. In my mid-20s, and for reasons I'm not really sure why, I became increasingly interested in aviation. Initially I was quite fearful of flying, but after I mastered that, I became interested in the technical side of flying, as well as the comfort of flying in first and business, and as well as the travel, which usually happens at the end of the flights. So yeah, I'd say mid-20s probably. The next question is from Alex Tomov. What are my 5 favourite airlines? I don't really have favourites, but I must admit I probably have a soft spot for Qantas, Air New Zealand and British Airways, probably just in part because I enjoy visiting New Zealand and the UK. And probably because their culture is similar to the Australian culture, except we're better at cricket. The second part of that question was, have I ever considered being a pilot? I'm actually often asked if I would consider being a pilot. The problem is my personality. I'm not anywhere near obsessive enough. I'd be the kind of person that wouldn't want to double check how much fuel we've loaded because I just want to get on the runway and spool up the engines. So I'm probably not the kind of person you'd want looking after you at 40,000 feet above the Pacific Ocean. Peter Hastings asked a good question. Do I select my seat or just get one at check-in? I definitely always make sure I do quite a lot of research, and as soon as I book the tickets, which in many cases is 6 months out, I'll be on Seat Guru or various flying forums trying to get advice about the best seat possible. I'd never leave it until check-in because firstly I always want a window seat, but you'd actually be surprised by how much variability there is in different seats. Some, even if they're still in business or first, are quite good, and other ones are reasonably bad. So, and if you look in some of particularly my newer videos, I'll actually be commenting on which the best seats are that you should be using and selecting. A question from Steve Maron. Will owls and pussycats ever be able to live together in perfect harmony? No. Captain Critique has a good question. Boeing or Airbus? I must admit I probably have a soft spot for Boeing, in part because of the 747, but also from a design point of view, I feel like the yoke, which both the captain and the co-captain share, which is connected, is a safer design than what Airbus have, which is with their separate joysticks. Although I do respect Airbus for making quite a few good aircraft, and in particular the Airbus A380, which I consider to be the most comfortable aircraft to fly in. Next question, Mr. Emichman, possibly not pronouncing that correctly. Destination you've never been to but is on your bucket list. I'd probably say one of the Scandinavian countries to see the Northern Lights. I've seen a lot of photos of that and it looks pretty amazing, so I think that's probably next. His next question was must-have items to take on board. I must admit I don't actually take that much on board. I'll always have my camera, particularly if I know that I'm not going to have access to in-flight entertainment between the gate and taking off and landing. I'll make sure I have something to read, but otherwise I don't take a whole lot with me. I must admit, I'm not one for all these different travel accessories and things like that. Next question was best and worst airline food. I'd say the worst airline food would have to be British Airways in economy class from London through to Rome. So it's a 3-hour flight in a full service airline and there was no food at all, which I think is ridiculous for someone who's not meant to be a low-cost carrier. But otherwise, when there was actually food provided that was terrible, it would be the China Airlines A330 business class flight I had from Sydney through to Auckland a year or two ago. I think it was fish, but it just tastes like rubber. And the best food, I must admit I'm not much of a foodie, so I can't really judge that well. But I was certainly impressed by the Qatar business class food I had when I flew with them from Doha through to Munich 2 years ago in the A350. So the next question, what are the 3 most important criteria you judge a flight by? I would say one of the most important things is the personableness of the crew. There's a lot of different sort of styles of flight attendants in sort of first and business class. Some are very subservient, and I must admit I don't really like that as much. I find that quite awkward, and that sort of clashes, I think, with the sort of Australian culture whereby we're reasonably egalitarian, we're not that classist. And then the other end is sort of where you have, where they're much more personable, they're much more engaging, they're willing to laugh and joke with you. And that's one thing which I like about Qantas, which again I think is a reflection of Australian culture. So there's a personableness of the crew, the actual seat itself. So I really enjoy having access to both the window view, because I like looking outside, but also having access to the aisle. As I've said in other videos, I have a small bladder, so I'm always visiting the loo. I think one of the third things that I usually think is quite important when choosing a flight is the actual type of aircraft. If I've flown it before, if it's particularly interesting. For example, I was quite keen to fly the new 747-8 later this year, so I've got quite a convoluted route just so that I can go via Frankfurt to test that out. So I'd say they're probably the main things that I'm interested in: the actual seat, the personableness of the crew, and the actual aircraft, and if it's new or interesting. So next question. Have you ever experienced a scary flight, such as thought you were going to crash? 5 years ago, I remember flying out of Sydney in a Qantas A330. It was quite rough and stormy, and as we were taxiing, you could see a whole lot of lightning. About 30 seconds to a minute after we took off, the captain came over the PA system and announced that it was going to get even rougher. And in the background, you could actually hear an alarm going off. So we almost possibly came out that time. Another time was when we was flying with LL from Bangkok into Tel Aviv. And just before landing, the pilot came over and the PA system and said there was a problem with one of the tires. So when we landed, we'd be met by emergency services. Nothing ended up happening. It was fine. Fire trucks were there. They came and had a look, and then they left, and then we got off. Probably the flight leaving Tel Aviv was a bit more dramatic. As we were actually checking in for the flight, news of MH17 being shot down was just coming through. And this was all happening as there was a war happening around Tel Aviv at the time. As we were taxiing in the plane away from the terminal, there was what I thought I could see an explosion in the distance, which was quite concerning. I'm assuming it was the Israeli missile defense system taking out a rocket in the distance. From what I understand, Ben Gurion Airport is very well protected, but still that's quite nerve-wracking. Then when we took off, we knew that we were landing in Hong Kong, where there was a cyclone, or hurricane if you're from America, affecting the airport there. And so that actually made for an incredibly rough landing as well. Another question, what is the worst behaviour of passengers you've witnessed while flying? I must admit I haven't seen that much bad behaviour. I think one of the most annoying things is when people speak loudly in airport lounges. FaceTime seems to be a classic example of this. people don't seem to realize that putting their phone on speakerphone and then speaking at normal volume to everyone in the lounge probably isn't completely acceptable, unless of course it is a public conversation, which it never is. I do remember once seeing a British Airways first class passenger chuck a bit of a spaz because he arrived to board the plane and then found that the priority line was just as long as the standard lane. I think that's in part a criticism of BA because they allow almost everyone access to the single priority lane. But anyway, he other than just being a bit annoyed, it wasn't too bad. Next question from Jordan Young. What have I got planned for 2018? I'll answer that right at the end of the video, but that's a good question. Braden Lowe has a question. What frequent flyer program am I a part of? Just Qantas and Virgin Airlines. Stefan Hoffman has a question. Have you ever been identified as a YouTuber at an airport before? I have now actually. I've had some flight attendants recognize me recently on the plane, which is cool for me. And I've also had some people recognize me at Melbourne Airport before a fly as well, which I was very flattered about. So that was kind of cool. And if you do see me at an airport, I'm always happy to chat. So come up and say hello. Carl P has an interesting question. Do you think a long-haul point-to-point model, as seen in the 787, is proving more successful than the hub-to-hub model, which was, I guess, part of the plan with the A380? Look, I mean, I think at the moment it is. But I suspect as the flying population increased dramatically, particularly as places like India and China have a lot more people flying, I think the skies are going to become increasingly crowded, in which case there's going to be a limitation on airport landing slots, and then aircraft like the A380 will actually be far more attractive. So I do suspect production of the A380 will stop very shortly. And in 30 or 40 years time, we'll probably look back at it and think that it was just ahead of its time. It'd be interesting to see. Adam the Aussie has a question. What's your favorite regional airport and plane combination? Good question, although I probably haven't flown enough regionally. I think JetGo in Australia probably have the smoothest regional aircraft. Although I do enjoy the go-kart feeling of the QantasLink -8s, although some people who are a bit fearful of flying, I can understand, probably wouldn't enjoy that. And the second part to that question was, what's the smallest to largest aircraft connection you have made? So I'd say it's probably an A320 from Queenstown to Christchurch, and then I've caught an Emirates A380 from Christchurch across to Sydney. Next question from McDonough32. I would love to hear how to optimize points and rewards. Look, it's a huge topic, and I won't go into too much detail now, but I mean, I think the main thing is to earn points, frequent flyer points from credit card purchases and put everything through the credit cards. I never carry cash. Everything I ever spend money on is always through a credit card, either an Amex card or a Visa or MasterCard. So that's probably the main thing. And then Google, there's many point hacks websites around, and they'll give you far more information than I will. But I think the main thing is get credit cards and spend everything on them. Never use cash. Patrick Donnelly asks the question, what aircraft do you enjoy flying in the most? Again, purely from a comfort point of view, it would be the Airbus A380. Although there is something special about flying in the Queen of the Skies, the 747. And I'm really looking forward to flying in the upgraded version of it, the 747-8, in September this year. Next question, CB1980. What sort of car do you drive? It is a Ford XR8, and you actually briefly saw it in my JetGo video. It's only sold in Australia. It's sort of like a four-door Mustang. So it's a reasonably large four-door sedan, and it's got a supercharged 5-litre V8, which is surprisingly fuel efficient. Lucas Rutter has a question. If you had a choice of flying in the Qantas 787 or the Qantas A380 long haul and business, which would you choose? At the moment, it would be the 787 just because the actual business class suite is significantly better. But from next year and the year after, Qantas will be upgrading the A380 and putting very much the same business class seat into the A380, in which case it will actually be the best option. Because it also has a first class cabin, so there's always the chance that you might be upgraded into that with points. So I would 787 now, but in about 2 years' time, I'd probably be preferencing the A380. Next question from Intense Beats: what's your favorite plane? I guess favourite passenger plane would be the Boeing 747-400. My favourite military plane, I guess, would be probably the Lockheed F-117 stealth fighter, which I'm actually yet to see in the metal, and I look forward to seeing one, hopefully in the US next year. I remember seeing that as a kid and just thinking that looked amazing, and it still looks pretty cool. So those two would probably be my favourite aircraft. Okay, so that's all of the questions so far. If you have any more questions, just comment on this video and I'll try and answer them at a later time. But now let's get to the competition, whereby I was giving away 3 Qantas business class pajamas and 2 amenity kits. So I selected the winners by going to random.org and there I got a computer program to select 5 random numbers between 1 and 119, which is how many people entered the competition. So the winners are as follows. Jeet 100000, Luke Dawson, Rosa Lewis, CheckedIn, sugiarto tjahyono, apologies for the pronunciation. So if those guys want to send me a private message, and with 2 things, firstly their preference for either PJs or an amenity kit, and the second thing is your postal address, and I'll send them to you. Send the message as fast as you can, because the PJs or kit will be given out on a first message, first served basis. If you didn't win, thank you for entering anyway. I plan on having a lot more of these competitions, so keep an eye out for new videos and more information about how you can win stuff. So 2 more things. At the end of my last video, you may recall I put up some footage from inside some aircraft, and I asked you to guess what sort of aircraft they were from. Here's the answers. And some of you actually did quite well and correctly identified all of them, which is quite impressive, because on quite a few of them there was actually not really many identifying features, so I was quite impressed. So the first one was a Cathay A350. The second one was the Japan Airlines 787-8. After that was a Qantas 747-400. The next one was a LATAM 787-9, taking off from Auckland. Straight after that was actually the same aircraft, just above the clouds. The next one was an American Airlines Embraer E175. And then the last footage was an Emirates A380-800 coming in to land in Sydney. Just a brief comment about British Airways, which has copied a lot of criticism from YouTubers, and probably for good reason. Considering they were an amazing airline and their colours were proudly on display for many of the first ever aircraft that a lot of the world would have ever seen, and of course they flew the Concorde, things really have gone downhill. And just to think these were the guys that launched the first ever lie flat seats in business class. Unfortunately, they just haven't upgraded business class really since then. Unfortunately, it seems like the current administrators are desperately trying to squeeze as much money out of them as possible, and they're relying purely on their reputation to sell any tickets. It's much like Rolls-Royce, which particularly during the 1980s and 90s were making cars that were vastly inferior to those being made across the channel, and ironically enough it wasn't until the Germans took over Rolls-Royce that they started actually making proper luxury cars again. But I digress. I really have a soft spot for BA, and I know a lot of other people do as well. So I really hope that the administrators do recognise all the criticism that they're getting and realise that they're actually destroying a brand that a lot of us really love. Now, just before we finish, I thought I'd just give you a bit of an update about what's happening for the rest of the year. So I've already got quite a few flights booked, which I'm quite excited about. So they include the Qantas A330 business class, the Cathay Pacific 777 first class, British Airways 767, which could well be the last time I fly that aircraft, the British Airways A320 economy class, which is something to look forward to, Qatar A380 first class, and I plan to visit the Imperial War Museum at Duxford in the UK, which is regarded as one of the best aviation museums in the world, and I'm really looking forward to that. Then later in the year I've got the Malaysian A330 business class, Malaysian A350 first class, Lufthansa 747-8 business class, ANA 787-9 business class, as well as possibly some other things that might come up. Now, thank you to everyone who entered the competition. Apologies if you didn't win, but keep an eye out for my new videos, because I do make a plan of actually having a lot more giveaways. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next video.